everybody for coming. So we're really happy to be here. Appreciate your time on this Tuesday night.
Yeah.
So welcome to the final presentation for the Brattleboro Farm and Food System Assessment. We're going to talk about the process and talk about some findings and some of the. Oh, great.
And I'm going to take care of the lights just so it's fair.
We're being recorded by BCTV as well. So, all right. So, let's see. Oh. Yeah. Okay.
We'll introduce ourselves. I'm Carissa Brewton. I am one of the co-lead researchers for this project, and just a little bit about me is that I'm a registered dietitian, so I have a background in nutrition and food security here in Brattleboro. I also have a master's of food and agriculture, law and policy from Vermont Law School, which might be a strong show. And I'm an original member and a founding member of the Brattleboro Food Sovereignty Working Group, which we'll talk about in the history section, but that was the group that kind of where this idea came from.
And I'm Emma. I'm a farmer. I'm from Vermont, born and raised, and I also have a master's degree.
And then Mafalp.
The same thing in Mafalp, yeah. Okay, so we're going to talk through the overview quickly before we get into the findings.
Yeah, so a quick just overview of what we're here to do. We set out to study the local food system of Brattleboro with the intent to look at where long-term resilience could be built, where there's opportunities, gaps, strengths, and obstacles. And we wanted to foster a sense of collaboration and direct communication with stakeholders to keep that feedback loop pretty tight and keep whatever the stakeholders were saying to come to us, and use that to see what opportunities were there.
Yeah, the goals were really for this to be an information resource. There are recommendations in this, but we really wanted this to be sort of a snapshot in time of what's happening in this food system as it is right now. After kind of an intense 4 years-ish, especially brought on by COVID. And then also to sort of highlight and put forth some of the really amazing work that's already happening. So while we did include recommendations, we wanted to really touch on the things that already are happening, maybe need more support, need more attention, but are happening. And then, to provide recommendations. Our hope is that this will potentially inform town planning, but also for private sector development, nonprofits, their programming may be able to pull on this from as a resource for applications. We've already had some interest in that respect, and so and to kind of just support the work that's already happening, as I said.
And to take a step back into the history a little bit. So this came from the Food Sovereignty Working Group that was founded during COVID of people working at mostly food access programs, coming together, wanting to work more together, and then at the same time, the Agriculture Advisory Committee on the town was revitalized and working on the farmer side. So we both had these similar ideas of wanting to do a project like this, came together, joined forces, imagined kind of the scope of this assessment, and then Emma and I came in and made it happen. So this has been going on for 1.5 years, and we're finally here. So back in January of last year, we had signed contracts with Vermont Law and with the town to get this project started. We held a couple initial stakeholder informational meetings where we asked stakeholders like you all what they wanted to see out of the project. We also asked them to share any data with us that they'd be willing for us to use. So that's the 19 unique data sets that we looked at. And we also studied 33 laws and policies from local to federal scope to give ourselves a background of what is the policy and legal structure behind the food system. So this first part was done as an independent study through Vermont Law, and it really formed a solid foundation of knowledge for us before we got into the interviews. And then from June of last year through February of this year, we conducted a lot of interviews, 2 focus groups. We tabled at both the farmers market and FoodWorks to distribute our eater survey, and we ultimately ended up getting almost 200 surveys from the general Brattleboro population telling us about their experience eating in Brattleboro. And for the interviews, we reached out to many leaders and employees of different food-related and business organizations and asked them a series of questions and have pages and pages of notes from all of that. And so we pulled all of that together in the past 3 months to draft the final report that many of you have in your hands. We shared this draft with the stakeholders before it was finalized. We presented to the select board, and tonight is the final presentation. The final report is basically done, and this is the end of the project.
Okay, so all of that is sort of context. So now we're going to talk, the bulk we're going to talk about is what we found. What were the themes that came up and some recommendations that we pulled from those. So throughout all of that data collection, a lot of really clear themes emerged. We interviewed a very broad array of people across the food system, from farmers to value-added producers, restaurants, people working in the charitable food system, working in entrepreneurial spaces. But still, even though it was quite diverse in terms of business types, we found there were a lot of commonalities in terms of issues that people were facing. Slightly tweaked to their circumstances, but still kind of clear, same experiences. So we're going to walk through some of those. There's about 17, or there are 17. So we're not going to talk about all of them, but you can see here's some of them, and they're obviously all in the report.
We broke them up into universal themes. Can you go back one? So these kind of came up from everyone, and all of these did too, but these are more strengths, and then we have gaps and threats, and we wanted to highlight where there's innovation.
One more copy.
Yeah, there's one more copy.
Yeah.
And I should say, there's going to be a digital copy. These are just sort of like a starting point if you want to leaf through as we're here. There's going to be more copies.
And we found a couple things that need fixed.
Yeah, so
it's still
you see a typo, we know. Okay, so we're going to talk through specifically some of the themes and get more in depth. And at the end, when we have questions, if you want to dive into any of the ones we don't talk about, we can do that.
Okay. So first, what came up very clearly was that this system is increasingly pressurized from all angles. On the production side, costs are rising on all sides. So for the cost of doing business, of producing food, that's rising with fuel costs, fertilizer, feed, animals, all of it. So that raises the cost of our local food, and farmers are struggling already to make ends meet often. So that's pressure for them. They also have limited access to infrastructure in this region for scaling up, or at least appropriate infrastructure that's kind of ready for them to move into. And there's a lot of investment needed to make the infrastructure that is available up to par, which Emma will talk about more in a different theme. So that limits their growth and increases the pressure. And then on the eater side of things, inflation is raising food costs, as I'm sure we're all aware, on our wallets, and that there's an impact of inflation on benefit eligibility and just broadens the income disparities that are already quite present. So the report goes into more details of how these nuances play out, but it's a stressful time to work in the food system. Another clear theme that came up was the passion that people in the Brattleboro area have for getting local food to local eaters, from both farmers to the eater side and everybody in between. People really want to get local food to local people while understanding that we need other markets to also keep the food system strong and viable. And some specific programs that make this more possible is Crop Cash and Crop Cash Plus through NOFA Vermont, which they offer people who are eligible for SNAP, which is the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, or 3 Squares Vermont here. They can get cash, their benefits doubled in value at a farmer's market under Crop Cash, and then Crop Cash Plus was running for a couple for during COVID, and that would triple the value. So if they had $10 of benefits, making $30 at the market. And then Boost Your Bread is a program that the Winter Farmers Market started very similar, but it expands the eligibility to people who are not just on SNAP. So it raises the income eligibility. And another place where local food gets to local eaters is through schools, which have a robust farm-to-school program. Food service directors and the kitchen staff are very interested and desire to serve more local food and make it from scratch. There's some stress points from the food service management companies that aren't so supportive of that. But the people in the schools themselves are very passionate about getting kids in the garden, getting fresh food onto their plates. And this is also a great market for farmers who are able to provide to an institution like a school, so they have more, a very predictable schedule of ordering often. Another big theme that was also stressful to listen to was that the lack of resource for community programs. One of the questions that was asked in almost every interview was, where are you most well-resourced in your work? And everybody in like the nonprofit food security side of things said we don't have enough resources, we're very under-resourced from having inadequate or tenuous grant funding for their work, and that their work is always needed, but the grant funding is not always guaranteed. And then the regulations and reporting required to get the funding or keep it. It takes a lot of time, a lot of money, it's often inefficient. Also, food donations from restaurants, farmers, grocery stores, people are decreasing across the board, so there's less food to go around in the charitable food system, or at least you can feel that way. Also, mental health training for workers and volunteers is something that many are trying to incorporate, many of these organizations, because it is very emotionally taxing to work within the system and see it breaking down so often. But that's there's more time, energy, administration, training, and money that's required to do that. So that's a need for many organizations. And then a lot of the organizations rely on volunteers, which a lot of volunteers tend to be older or retired, which is great because they have the availability and the time. But we also need strong and able-bodied people, which is challenging when you have a job and kids and people, just very busy lives. And so a lot of the organizations indicated that their volunteer pool was, fluctuated a lot or wasn't always reliable. And the last one that I will touch on is the need for deeper connections between the programs themselves and between the programs and the communities that they serve, or the community that they serve. So there was this very strong sentiment of solidarity between all of the organizations, especially like the food shelves, food pantries, the food bank. They really support one another well, and they want to do more of that. They're just strapped for time and energy and bandwidth. And they also need to spend more time building trust-based relationships with the community. Without this hierarchical model, there's much more of an effort to come in and build that relationship first before saying this is what we have to give you. But that also takes more time, energy, and communication, and people are strapped for all of this right now.
Yeah.
Because of the increased needs. So
overall theme is nobody has enough time.
Yeah.
Or administrative capacity.
Or money.
Yeah. So on the more positive side, something that we found was that this is an incredibly diverse farm and food system in Vermont in terms of functions, what people are growing, size of operations, people who are working in the food system. There's a lot of really diversified producers, a lot of really diversified programming, and that was really strong to see. That was really, really amazing. And then also there's a great market base here. There are a lot of places for producers to sell their goods. Every producer that I spoke to had 5 different markets that they were engaging in. They were doing a CSA, going to the farmer's market, they had a farm store, they were going to the co-op, they were selling to Food Connects. So there were a lot of ways that producers are engaging with selling their food. And then also that eaters and buyers, markets are really, really connected to producers and really want to prioritize buying locally from producers when possible. There were some pressure points with that around time on the market side, and buyers not being able to always afford it, but there was a really strong desire there to be able to prioritize going directly to a farmer or getting it as locally as possible. We spoke to a lot of value-added producers, and they all spoke to the lack of manufacturing space. We did speak with the BDCC, who's done some really amazing work with developing manufacturing spaces, but they're really not able to keep up with the industry, which is kind of exploding in a lot of ways. Value-added producers in that sector in the food system is very alive, and it's growing very quickly, and people who have existing businesses want to keep scaling up, but they're not able to find places to grow into, or they can't afford to build out the space to meet their needs, their very specific needs for what they're manufacturing. And this is really preventing growth, that producers are ready to make that leap, but they just, fully can't. They don't have the capacity in the place that they are, location they are. So agritourism is something we kind of touched on because, Brattleboro is right on the doorstep of Massachusetts. We get, in Vermont in general, we get a lot of out-of-state traffic. Vermont has a really strong identity as an agricultural state, and we really kind of market that and want people to come in and be a part of our agricultural scene. And so while this report was really focused on local, how do we support local producers, it emerged that a lot of producers, they also need that out-of-state income, that's an important piece of their stability as a business. And so I guess kind of balancing between the two, that was something that producers really talking about a lot. How do we focus on our local customers, build those relationships, at the same time acknowledge that this is not a super wealthy area, we need to make a certain living, and we need that out-of-state money. I think a lot of producers spoke about that kind of universally. So the last one here is, again, in a similar vein. We really care about this local food system. We want to have some autonomy here and be able to feed the people who are here with the food that is also here and keep it kind of that economy circulating locally. But Vermont cannot feed itself autonomously. We don't have the resources to do that. Brattleboro cannot cut itself off from the rest of the world. It's just not possible. So how do we really define what Vermont is and what Brattleboro is in the context of this more regional market? So Western Massachusetts has a really big impact on the Vermont agricultural scene. That relationship is really important. So what are we to them? What are they to us? How do we define that? And how do we tell the story? This was almost a direct quote from a producer that I interviewed. How do we tell the story of the Vermont agricultural system? What is the story that we're telling to the rest of the world? How do we define that for ourselves so that it's not defined for us by the rest of the world? So that was a tough shift, I think, for us a little bit because we are so hyper-focused on this local idea, but we thought it was kind of important to tee up that thought process. I think Vermont in general is thinking about that quite a bit, of what is our identity here and how do we carve that out for ourselves in agriculture. Okay, so these are the recommendations. So we came up with, I think, 7 recommendations. We're going to talk through those. When we presented to the select board, we wanted to really make it clear and clear to everybody that these are not recommendations that are meant to be attached to one specific entity or one person that has said we're going to do that. These are things that we pulled from the themes that we thought made sense to put out to the world. We hope that people will use these as a resource to move forward, or they'll spark some inspiration for something else. So we're going to talk through those, and we're excited to talk to you all about it too afterwards if you have some thoughts. So directly related to that infrastructure piece, there really needs to be more concerted effort to develop commercial spaces and also to support producers in building out infrastructure. So if you get a commercial space, a space to make your product, you also need very specialized equipment for packaging, you need to distribute it. So there's a lot of steps at which the producer is bearing a lot of the weight of paying for all of that. So yeah, we really think there needs to be a grant or loan fund for infrastructure investment. BDCC does do consulting. There are resources to talk people through how to access these things, but there's not necessarily a dedicated fund to make those investments. And then also just an inventory of spaces that we have available. What are places in the surrounding area that are being underutilized, where there might be a potential to build them into a space that could be for manufacturing? Are there places that are being used for manufacturing but need to be updated or not really meeting the producer's needs anymore?
And so that kind of dovetails into the next recommendation, which is developing a multi-purpose community space. So Emma was talking about the production and manufacturing side, but then also for the eating, community building, distribution of food space. We heard that it's a place that's convenient, ideally downtown, so it's walkable for people without transportation, as transportation is a huge barrier to food in rural areas like here. So this place could have a retail and CSA pickup space for farms to participate in, people to come pick up their CSA shares. Could have a commercial kitchen and food storage areas for small businesses or community members to use to, or organizations like Edible Brattleboro to do a cooking class. And then a downtown weekday or like an evening farmers market targeted towards locals, as the weekend markets tend to be more out-of-staters, we heard. So locals wanted a space that felt more accessible for them and more designated for them. So that would be pretty neat. And there's some projects happening already in Brattleboro that could meet this, like Retreat Farm bought the Grafton Cheese Factory, and they have big plans for that, so that could meet some of these, depending on how that evolves. So there's not no hope. Another one is that another recommendation we have is to establish a food system coordinator for some scope of geography, probably not just Brattleboro because that's pretty small, but maybe for southern Vermont or Windham County at least, to fill in those gaps, especially administrative and communication-wise, that the organizations that really want to collaborate more, that's the heavy lift, is the administration, the time and communication investment. So if there was a position dedicated to kind of continuously doing a process similar to what we did during this, which is bringing people together, bringing up, shared goals, building consensus around them, and then, maintaining the energy and the drive towards accomplishing those shared goals, would be pretty awesome.
Yeah, so climate change obviously kind of threaded through this whole thing. It was mostly felt or largely felt on the producer side, but obviously trickles down to the eaters and to markets and then to eaters. Something that came up a lot in talking to producers was it felt like there was not enough funding or support for short-term disaster relief. We had some really traumatic events happen in the spring and early summer. But then also to make long-term climate adaptation changes to their operations. There are some resources available, but it's hard to access those. There's a really big administrative lift on that as well, especially if it's a federal program. And so producers said, can there be something local? Is there a way for us to access funding quicker when we have a disaster, or for long-term adaptation, but it's a smaller funding pool? So we're not having to go to NRCS, which has a massive funding pool or massive pool of applicants. We have to go through a really long process. And it's for a small scale agricultural state, these are small farms, that lift can feel really burdensome to have to go through that really extensive process to apply for federal relief.
Can I add something to that?
Yeah.
Just made me think of the fundraising campaign that NOFA had last year, and they, after both the floods and the freezes, but mostly the floods, they did a massive statewide fundraising campaign and directly funneled those dollars directly to farmers and with a much more streamlined process than going through federal avenues, and farmers really appreciated that. Ease.
But that was
a time of crisis.
Yeah, it was a crisis.
Could we have something like that for
long-term adaptation?
Because we need to plan for the changes that are coming.
Yep.
What happened there?
Okay, never
I
mind.
guess we did a little transition.
We did. Go ahead. Okay.
And so, improving food access, there's always improvements that can be done. But specifically 2 points that we wanted to highlight were the mover, expanding the mover route, which is our local public transportation system. to include a winter weekend route to the winter farmers market, which currently doesn't, there isn't a weekend route, so it's hard for people to get up to Winston Prouty.
There is now.
There is now.
Yes, during the process of
Right.
the report
This
near
did
the
not
end, they
exist.
actually put that in, yeah.
We heard your recommendation.
Yes. So there is the winter one now, and there is an extended evening route that goes till 8 p.m. That was another issue we heard, was that the mover stops at 5, and how am I supposed to go grocery shopping after work? But expanding the route to Wild Carrot Farm, Scott Farm, and Walker Farm would make those farm stands a lot more accessible to general population. And then also an area where more relationships is desired is to continue to strengthen direct relationships between producers and the charitable food system. This has already been started to be fostered by the Vermont Food Bank through a couple of different grants and programs that they have, but folks spoke to their desire to really have a much more direct relationship with one another and to know how to support one another in their work.
So increased food system education, something I heard, two kind of quotes that pulled out were one that producers really want help sort of telling the story of what they're doing and lifting the veil on their work. Especially as we head into more challenging times with climate change and how that impacts what they're able to provide to the community. It changes the growing season, it changes what's available on the shelves. Being able to have help from the community, from everybody, to tell that story of what it really is to grow, to meet those challenges is something that producers spoke of, and again, don't have the administrative capacity to do more outreach. Some are already doing it, but really need solidarity from the community and understanding their experience and helping to spread the word of the challenges that they face.
And piggybacking on that, the next recommendation is an idea, a way that could happen to support those eater-producer relationships, both for residents, for locals, and for visitors. An idea we had is that a website or a database that had both tells the story of the food system of Brattleboro, highlights our wonderful local producers and where you can get that food, but then also has information for locals about where you can get a hot meal for free, where you can go for some free groceries. So kind of to help decrease the stigma around the charitable food system by putting all the information together and for both visitors and locals, so we all know what's happening about food in town.
So the last one that was in the report we'll talk about is support equitable land access. This is a massive topic, and I think we say somewhere in the report as a disclaimer, this is an area that we could do an entire report on, so we barely skimmed the surface, and in Vermont in general and the country, this is something that's very much in the mind of representatives and people in the food.
And CAFS writes many reports
Yes,
on
and
this topic.
This is
So
a very complicated topic, so obviously not something that we can fully recommend, changing everything about it. But one thing that came up was leasing can be a good way for producers to break into the industry, but there are some challenges in that. Leasing is tenuous sometimes for producers. The landowners don't always understand what a working farm looks like, and that it's kind of messy sometimes, and it can be loud, and it's not all idyllic all year round. And so spoke to some producers that had issues with that, but then also some that had really found it to be an incredible entry point for them. They could get their business off the ground, they could save up, they could find land. So it doesn't solve the fact that there is less land available, but it potentially puts, one person said, positive social pressure on landowners to make their land available for leasing. And there's some of that happening, but there's a lot of land that is getting a current use tax break that is not really being utilized for farm activity fully. It's a very low bar to get a current use tax break. So that's a larger kind of recommendation, but that is something that has to be looked at generally. The current use, our agricultural activity on a piece of land is so minimal to be under current use, so it means that people who have land that they're not really using are getting to get this big tax break when it could be really used by producers to meaningfully start their business, to graze their animals, to get hay. So that's something that's a more state level issue, but falls into this area. The other thing, and this is something that Stephen put in, I'm sure would love to talk about it, but we have a lot of activity around solar power. Green Mountain Power is really invested in renewable energy. There have been some work here and there to kind of pair agriculture and solar power installations so that we're not taking up entire prime agricultural soil land with solar power, but we can still get some agricultural value off of that land. So that's something to investigate if there's more potential with Green Mountain Power or with other installations to integrate in some agriculture activity. Okay, so those are our that's all we're going to talk about from this, but we'd love to hear from you, questions, or if you guys just want to open up a conversation to share. Yeah, it's open.
We can go back maybe to the first themes page, just.
Oh yeah, so you can see the things we didn't. Yeah.
Maybe,
Yeah. Okay.
Talk a little bit minutes, Jeff. But thank you for coming.
Yeah,
and
thank
for
you so much
supporting
for
our work.
Yes.
So we were hoping that we could have a dialogue. If you want to talk to each other, talk to us, Stephen. We just wanted to foster some conversation. Yeah.
I'm just wondering, are there any examples of places in this country or anywhere else in the world where you could use that as an example of a really well-functioning system that you would like to have? Or something that you would aspire to?
Yeah, it's a good question. It's a good question. I mean, I'm of the opinion, as a food systems scholar, that I think that Vermont is kind of on the cutting edge of food systems innovation. We're doing it on a very small scale, so that poses some challenge when you try and scale up something like this to the scale that we really need in this country to feed everybody.
Places with higher population.
Because, yeah, places with higher populations, we're pretty rural. So, no, I personally can't find another place that has figured all these things out. I think that Vermont is doing a really incredible job of trying to ask some of these questions and fix some of these things.
And the food system is so complex and nuanced by geography and by community that really doesn't look the same in any place.
That's also
there are, tenets that are the same. If food has to go from the ground to the plate eventually, but it's so different in each place that something we did want to center and highlight in the report is that there are some really special elements of Brattleboro that make our food system unique compared to more populated areas or other parts of Vermont, parts of New England. So we think Brattleboro is pretty special.
Can I chime in on that one
Yeah.
real quick? The one thing that I know is true is that Europe does a really much better job of supporting small scale farmers and supporting local terroir and local food, because that's all they have after having cut up the continent for so long. We instead are subsidizing big ag and not in places like Vermont. So that's where we could take some tips from Europe and how they maintain their small and local identity.
Yeah.
I mean, what I was thinking of, for an example in my mind, is like Italy.
Mm-hmm.
You travel around Italy, all the small towns, it's abundance of local fresh produce, cheese, bread. It's always there right in front of you.
Mm-hmm.
And they have tons of markets, outdoor markets, and it just seems to me like it's a more robust system. It's probably been like that for quite a long time, but I wonder if what are they doing now to make it strong? Why is it so successful?
Yeah, it kind of ties into the agritourism piece and this telling the story piece of our agricultural system. I think something that Italy has done really well is they have really defined themselves as a place that people go to eat. They go to be a part of the agricultural scene. There's very specific things that people expect. And I think that's part of the reason it's become a really key economy for them in Italy. And so that's kind of something that Vermont needs to think about. Like, are we really going to be the place that people go for local food from all over the country, from all over the world? Like, is that really something that we want to invest, our advertising in and our energy in putting that message out? And I think somewhat we're doing that. But there's also a scarcity in the state as well. And so it's a little bit of a scary thing to just open the doors to other people to come in when people living here are not getting their needs met.
And
so
keeping that equity lens on in this balance of for locals and out-of-staters. It's important. Any other questions, comments? Yeah.
I have I'm now realizing after watching this, like, unrelated question. I saw it on Instagram, and the picture was of that farm school that recently, I think, got acquired by, like, a support program.
Yeah, I don't know much. I've heard inklings,
I came here because I thought this was about that.
Oh!
And I really appreciated watching this. It was wonderful.
Great. Yeah.
But I was like, do you know anything about that?
We got that photo from Seth, who did help us with the layout.
Yeah.
And so we credited in the layout, but that farm is not something that we're related to.
But
Yeah.
maybe Stephen does.
Yeah, maybe Steven, yeah.
I think you're referring to the Famolare farm down by Fort Dummer.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Families First is
Yeah.
a nonprofit that takes care of adults with disabilities and their community. They've acquired the farm. They're actively looking for a farming partner. If you know anybody who's interested, they want to see that remain in use, but they need someone to help them work it and ideally turn that into a program that incorporates their community members
I
as
see,
well.
that makes sense. I know someone who works for that, and she was telling me about how small their support capacity is, like and so when I saw that, I was like, how are they gonna run a farm? And that makes a lot of sense, so thank you. And thank you guys.
Yeah, thanks for coming. That's a happy accident.
I have a question similar on the resources end. Given all the lack of, I guess, centralization, were there resources that came up as being very useful for any either eaters or farmers, or was it really just like we just need more?
Resources in terms of like time, money, like that way, or like
I guess,
specific documents.
Like if I had a question, where should I go to? You know, like
Yeah,
I'm
yeah.
a farmer and I'm like, I don't know where to go for my, vetted pack information.
Yeah, I mean no, there isn't a place to go for that specifically. So I think that's something, I think you talked about a little bit, or that is it somewhere in the document of, needing a landing page for people to access this kinds of thing. Everything is very dispersed. And so.
You kind of need to know who and where to look
To
to
get
get
it.
the information you need.
Yeah, this is something that a food systems coordinator would do, right? It's like pull all this together. I mean, we put some resources at the end, but those aren't like specific, like go here and you'll get all this stuff about grant funding or, for your pack house. Like there isn't kind of one place to land for that. I wish there was a better answer for you, but the reality is there isn't.
I was wondering, I was interested.
Yeah. Thanks.
First of all, a funny anecdote. I love like driving in Westminster on Route 5 and seeing like the solar panels with the chickens hanging out underneath them. I love that, and that just made me think of your agrivoltaics. Little bullet point. But I guess the question I have is, what are some ways that you might be able to see different producers in the area like be able to help each other? Because a lot of talk about providing resources for each other, helping each other, but like what would that maybe entail? If you have any idea?
I hate to put you on the spot, Ross, but in some interviews we heard something about Lilac Ridge and that there is some sales of people's products happening at other people's farm stands, and there's sort of like cross commerce between farmers. I don't know if you want to talk about that at all.
Well, I mean, our farm is kind of a microcosm of a lot of these different ideas. It's kind of interesting how we've adapted to, to maintain our business. But as far as cross-farmer sort of work, last year we started we opened up a little creamy stand at our farm, right next to our farm stand, and we worked with the Miller Farm in Vernon. They have a creamery, and we were really looking for an organic creamy. There wasn't one in the state. In fact, the only one was in California. And Pete worked on it, and he came up with a great recipe, and we were able to serve it last summer. We're going to do it again this year. We're really excited about it. But that was one. And we also sell maple syrup for their maple milk. So we bring, bring home creamy mix on the way back.
Cool trade.
Yeah, I mean, it's really.
I guess down to symbiotic relationship.
Yeah. And I think there are probably other examples. I mean, we have a cheese club that they drop off cheese for people to pick up for the West Brattleboro location. But I think all this, farmers simply, by nature have to try to figure out ways to work together and find ways to complement one another.
Yeah, it seemed like most producers that I spoke to were doing some kind of exchange like that. You know, they had a CSA and they were not growing their own greens. They were buying from another producer to have the greens for their CSA. Or Wild Care is a great example. They have a really extensive farm store and it's full of local products.
But they also buy from milkweed for
They also
CSA.
buy from milkweed. Yeah, there's a lot of kind of, like commerce happening in that way. But then I also think we spoke to some orchards after that frost. There was a lot of information sharing that was really important, and also just like mental health solidarity of like, wow, we lost 90% of our crops, and that's like really, really scary. And so let's meet and come together, and we can at least share in that hardship, and then also kind of plan for the future. So that's like very real, having that kind of information sharing. As a farmer myself, like the way that I learn the best is just by going to another farmer's farm and looking at what they're doing, and going, oh, I'm doing this totally wrong. They're doing it right. So yeah, I think those are kind of two ways they can help each other. But also there's also a lack of time is a really, hard resource when it's right in the middle of the growing season. You don't have a lot of time to like do field trips and
send an email.
Send a bunch of emails and stuff. So that's hard. You need to support producers in easily exchanging that information and working with each other.
Yeah.
Question, maybe it's more for you, and we talked about this a little bit, but like now that Brattleboro has gotten some of these recommendations, what is it doing to sort of implement it and carry it forward?
Yes, so we need to rewrite our town plan by the end of 2026. So we're about to head into that process, and this report will deeply influence the food and farm section of that. Beyond, in terms of the specific recommendations, there's some things that the town can support, but they can't lead. I think there's a big role for the regional commission in helping us take a better approach to food and farms in general, but we don't budget and invest in the regional commission enough. We're kind of weird in that way that Vermont is so small, we kind of jump almost from the town to the state level in terms of the programs, the funding, the county government, what county government, right? And so if we had more of a regional presence that could play the role of coordination that these guys are pointing at, and could look in a zoomed out fashion at all the assets in Windham County, really try and maximize infrastructure and commercial spaces and production spaces, and be able to connect the dots from Newfane to Bellows Falls to Vernon, that would go a really long way. So I think it's about supporting these things coming forward in our town plan, in the Windham Regional Plan, and thinking about what other players are involved, like BDCC for the business development side. And at the state level, how can we advocate to get financial support and get legislative solutions that can preserve land for all this to happen, unlock infrastructure and spaces for it to get produced, and maintain the kind of robust food security programs that we started to develop during the pandemic.
Well, and sort of along those lines, what are the thoughts on, I mean, I noticed that there's only about 3.6% that's actually conserved farmland, which I was surprised. I thought it might be more. But when we conserved our farm in the 90s, and one of the Vermont Land Trust's first project was Gateway Farm, which is on the Abbott Road. That was in their 80s. And that was to protect the land from actual development for a golf course and some sort of 80s style development. I'm curious to know what the thought is on housing crisis versus farmland, and where the conversation is around that right now.
Yeah, where's the conversation around that? It's happening above our pay grade. That's what I'll say. No, that's the challenge. That's really the tension right now. And I think conservation, although important, is a kind of tricky place in that conversation.
Yeah.
Vermont does conserve a lot of farmland, but Vermont Land Trust, for example, their conservation easements are very tight. And I think that's posing a lot of challenges for producers who want to put in farm worker housing, who need to diversify by having a short-term rental unit that would provide housing, but they can't because their land is conserved. So I think I was a legislative intern in the State House a year ago, and that was what everybody was talking about. Act 250, like how do we conserve at the same time as actually we need development. We need to put in housing units. So there's, I think, another disclaimer in here that, housing came up. Producers also talked about this labor issue really being tied to housing. We can't keep labor because they can't find anywhere to live. And that's like a really,
afford what is available.
and they can't afford what is available being an agricultural worker. So we kind of touched on it, but again, like that needs just its own research. Like it's not something that can be tacked on really easily into the things we were looking at. Yeah.
This is totally an anecdote, but my aunt is a small scale organic farmer in Connecticut, and she's on a land trust. For 20 years she's been on this land trust. And they won't even let her put trailers in because it's ugly, and the New Yorkers don't want to see the ugly trailers when they come to the organic farm.
Right.
So she has exactly what you were describing.
Yeah.
So the reason I did insist on agrivoltaics being mentioned in this is that it is one example of deconflicting land uses, and our zoning has done us a disservice over time because we think of things as being only used in one way, right? It can either be for farming, or it can be for energy, or it can be for housing, or it could be conserved and preserved for carbon now is what we're really thinking about. It should be integrated much more, and I think that's what we're trying to do with revising current use and Act 250 and all these kinds of things. But agrivoltaics, I think, is unique in that we are leading research into it at UVM into how we can both support the farms in giving them a source of revenue and power, literally power to the farm through the solar arrays. Those solar arrays lower the temperature that exists below them and can conserve water and prevent evaporation off crops. And the crops keep the panels cool, letting them run more efficiently. So there's all these win-win-wins. And I think we do need special carve-outs for things like workforce housing on farms. And there's a way in which we're just not keeping up in terms of regulation and innovation. And trusts, land trusts, are, I think, a slow-moving organism in general, so they're reluctant to that kind of change.
Plug for community land trusts, which are very different, and we did interview or get data from Earthbridge, and that is a land trust that is trying to be less restrictive. Community land trusts don't have conservation easements that are in perpetuity, meaning literally forever, don't care what happens. They have easements that are more collaboratively created, and the people on the organization board are also landowners. So there are ways of protecting, conserving farmland that also meets the needs of the producers. So yeah, I don't want to lump community land trusts under my grumpiness about land trusts in general. Yeah.
Yes, in the back.
Well, a couple things. I think that idea about looking at current use and also how we define farming and how we tax and all those things is something that would be so neat if you knew anyone who had time to put into researching it. For example, in the town of Brattleboro, if I had been one of the people who moved here and bought a farm after retiring somewhere else, or climate refugee from California, I could have bought my farm, not have a massive mortgage, not have to work off the farm to pay it, and I would then qualify as a farmer. But because I'm actually a low-income farmer who has to work off the farm to pay to start a new farm, I do not qualify as a farmer. And that means that I pay $11,000, $12,000 a year taxes, which means that I have to then go work even more off the farm, and it's kind of a vicious cycle, and that's just one example. So the whole thing about current use, I think that you're really smart to try to look at that more, because it's also, you can get current use, as long as you let someone who is a farmer use your land for anything, you can get current use. So I could be someone really wealthy doing nothing with my farm. Lots of those arrangements exist where people are really just mowing somebody's field. They're not even using it for hay, and they get the tax break, and they're kind of doing it using the farmers. That happens like a little less here than areas where there's bigger fields. But that, and then I don't qualify for current use right now because I work so much off the farm that I don't qualify. So that's like an example of the ironies. I think the situation like in Brattleboro, that whole system was set up to keep old family farms protected and to give people a break so they don't have that financial pressure to ditch their farm or develop it. But if you're actually trying to get new people to farm, there's something that could be changed there pretty easily. And then about the idea of I just think it's really important not to put more burdens on Brattleboro taxpayers. Because I know that anything I say, I still live a completely gifted life. And it's like choices and the luxury of land and good food. And so I would not want to see even more tension about that if, like, let's say the town of Brattleboro decided to have a food system coordinate. You mentioned Wyndham Regional Commission. I think that's like a perfect level for something like that. Because otherwise it's the people who show up at meetings like this and the people who don't have, 4 kids at home and 3 jobs that would say yes to that, and that would be really unfair and just make it harder for people, some people.
What is the name of your farm?
Barely named. It was Brook Meadow Farm.
Oh, yeah.
And I call it Rosie's Farm. That's my dog's name. Yeah.
I mean, there's a lot in there. Current use, part of the reason we started from a policy perspective and started on a larger scale is because some of these regulations, like current use, really underpin everything, and it's not something that everyday people really have a lot of control over and really know that much about. It's why I went to get my master's degree in this, because I was like, this is impacting me and I have no idea what it really is and what it does. But I think current use is a big one that is being misused. It's just misused. I think have further almost completely strayed away from its purpose, which is to help people growing food, farming, also forestry, and making it easier for them to keep their land and keep their business going. And now it's sort of just a shortcut for people who mow their field. Yeah, so yes, current use.
Is there a database of agricultural producers, what they produce, how much, how big their farms are?
Yeah, I mean, the mapping project that's linked in our report is essentially that. You want to talk about that?
Yeah, for a long time now, Brattleboro has kept inventory of agricultural lands, and they update it every once in a while. And one of the steps that was precursor to this was updating that. So we cataloged all the lands that are classified as agricultural, said whether they're active or inactive. If they're active, what are they being used for? And there's one page that has like it's a green page with pie charts and things on it, and you can see
One of the fancy ones.
some of the stats that were pulled from that. And
Near the beginning.
eventually, it's a full page of graphs. It's all, Do you know what page number that is? Did we put page numbers? 11. Yes. Or that's a different one. That's about food insecurity. That's the one there. Yeah, that gives the snapshot of all the stats that were pulled from the inventory of town lands. And to what Ross was saying earlier, I think that stat that you were talking about, what I would be curious to know is of the active farmland, how much is under conservation? Because I think that stat is of overall farmland, and there's so much that's dormant that it looks really small. But I think the ones that are active have been protecting themselves and conserving in that way. So a majority, I would guess.
And there is an actual map as well
Yeah.
that I think in the digital copy, I believe is linked, which will go live. And so you can actually go and see visually where everything is and what is agriculture and what is not. And also, so I think in there is also some land that is like unused and isn't agriculture, but could be. I feel like there's like a carve out for that of like potential places that
In
could
the
be
map.
used for, in the map. Am I remembering that right?
There's
Something like that?
inactive.
Inactive,
You can
yeah,
look at
thank
what's
you.
inactive and underutilized at this point.
Yeah. That's helpful to
Yeah.
see.
And that project wouldn't have been possible without Wyndham Regional Commission and their
Yes.
GIS expert, Jeff Nugent, and Drew Adam, who has been a 30-year member of the Agricultural Advisory Committee for the town and worked for the USDA and really has put a lot of effort and love into this. Can we also just really quickly say, this project would not have been possible without the support of the library
Yes.
and the Vermont Food Bank, who provided a grant that helped produce this in part.
Edible
and-
Brattleboro.
Edible
The
Brattleboro.
planning department,
Yeah,
Yeah.
Vermont law,
Yeah,
all of the stakeholders who participated,
yeah.
gave their time to be interviewed.
Yeah.
Everyone got a survey.
Where will we find this online? Where will it be published?
Town website, the new shiny town website, go see it,
Yeah.
press the
And
buttons.
we will, once everything's like digitally available, also including the recording of this presentation, we will continue to send out emails
Yeah.
and publicize
Publicize
as
it,
much
yeah.
as we can.
Yeah, when we were putting together this presentation, we were going through it again and we found some typos.
So
So
we
we
just
gotta go back in there. It was like, there's so many eyes of it on this, but we all missed it. So we're gonna do a little bit of editing and then it'll be out live, yeah.
Some questions about the potential coordinator position. When we were doing, what was it called, the Food Sovereignty Working Group? We looked at a federal grant, a USDA Community Food Grant, I think.
The community food project one?
Community Food Project Grant, yeah.
That's what
I work for them now.
What's that?
I work for them.
You work for them?
Yeah.
Cool.
Anyway,
Does
go
that
on.
mean that we can't apply?
Well, I work in a community food project grant program of doing technical assistance. So no, it doesn't.
She doesn't work for the
Yeah.
USDA.
I don't work for the USDA,
Okay.
yeah.
Well, it felt like were you part of those conversations?
Yeah, I mean, it's hazy in my memory, because it was a while ago, but yeah.
Yeah, and in the heart of the pandemic, yeah. But it did feel like a good fit for a lot of what you're talking about.
Yeah.
And it's a really hard application to put together and it requires a lot of stakeholder engagement, but you've been doing that work.
Mhm.
And I'm just curious if that's and I forget its time frame, but
We could definitely dig
Yeah,
into
it's a
those
good point.
files.
It's a good point.
seems like it could be a good fit. And then again, it's the question, is it Brattleboro, is it Wyndham County?
Yeah.
Just
You
trying
can
to think
find the
about.
person who can like do the coordination of just making
To
sure
apply for
applying that
grants.
for that grant.
Yeah.
That's a big job. But that would be really
It
exciting.
is a big job, yeah. If we tried and.
Yeah. So then we were like, this, we can't do this in the
We-
timeline we
we
have.
tried.
Yeah.
Actually, I've tried it a few times.
Yeah, it's a hard
It's a tricky one, yeah.
Yeah.
And that goes to show
Very
how this
competitive.
federal funding and there are these grants that sound so exciting and they're would be great opportunities for these projects, but then the lift to make it
It's huge.
an application and not
Yeah.
even carry it through is.
Also, that project, see if it's a 100% match too. So you have to find 100% funding match for it. So that's like huge. It's $100,000 to $400,000 grant. So like that's a lot of money to have to put up on the other side. So that's a big challenge. Yeah.
But you're reminding me though that Food Connects was the entity that helped organize that Brattleboro
Yeah,
Food
so we should
Sovereignty
also
Working
thank
Group.
Food Connects.
Right, and so in a sense, you're seeing a group that is not about, their mission is not community organization, it's community food, but they saw a need in the pandemic and they helped this kind of process kick off that has resulted in this kind of product. So
Yeah.
thank you, Food Connects, and Connor was,
And Connor, yeah.
Yeah.
So on that note, 10 years ago when Food Connect started, we were more of this community connective organization. And we ran some low-income farmers markets. We were more involved at the community level. And we had to make some really hard decisions around stopping doing some things. One of them was stopping this community connective tissue, because we had narrowed down into, let's make sure that this aggregation and distribution network is functioning properly, and make sure our farm school program is doing as well as it can. But we kind of gave up on doing this work, and it's pained me ever since. And this has triggered all of that. Like, oh yeah, we used to do that. We used to have
all these things.
we used to have these conversations. We used to bring people together in this room and talk about
And
stuff.
you wrote a report kind of similar to this from like 2009, right?
Yeah, we did.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We
So,
just read it.
so, but we really narrowed down on a couple tracks, and so yeah, just realizing that yes, this work is possible. It's valuable. It's relationship based. We've got a lot of strong relationships in this community. It doesn't feel like it's a heavy lift. It doesn't feel like it's coming out of nowhere, I guess is what I'm.
Yeah, no, a lot of like the topics that were discussed in your report definitely are themes that came through here. If you just look at both, it's like.
Yeah, and I think also important to say that when we started this, it's not that we thought there'd be resistance or it's just you don't know what to expect when you're asking so much commitment from stakeholders, but it was so clear very quickly that everybody is really interested in something like this happening.
Yeah.
Even organizations that are so above their head in terms of time, they're at capacity, over capacity, they're excited, like they want there to be more work happening and they want some of these solutions to move forward. So I think that's, actually the food system coordinator, that was the suggestion of people we interviewed. Because they were like, we really want this to happen, X, Y, Z, we have all these ideas, but we really just can't do it ourselves in terms of organizing it and sending the emails and doing the meetings. So I think now that we're at this point, our contract is done with the town, we're technically done. But as community members, we're hoping that this doesn't die and that people who are in it, who were interviewed and were excited about it, will keep using this moving forward, and that it actually will be a foundation for some of these ideas to be taken, changed, shaped what they need to be. So we've been saying we're gonna do a publicity tour, which we're kind of joking, but we do want this to get out to everybody and for people to use it however they want to use it, but for it to not die and people, for it to bear new fruit going forward, I would say, yeah.
There was also that Hunger Council meeting. It was the Farm to Plate created a new report, Vermont Farm to Plate created a report, food security report.
The food security action plan or something.
Action plan, yeah, not just a report, an action plan.
Yeah.
It's different.
And there was conversation with a lot of the Windham County Hunger Council members around kind of bringing more of the agriculture side into the Hunger Council, and in some ways trying to, I think, do a lot of what you're suggesting here and making this more of a Windham County food system group. So I've been doing this work for 15 years or so. I've been a member of the Vermont Farm to Plate network statewide. There's never been anything robust here.
And well, that's another one of the themes that we didn't
talk about today.
How the southern corner of Vermont or southern part of Vermont is not as active in these or thought of in these conversations as central and northern Vermont.
I used to drive 2 hours to go to a meeting. For
But now with,
years.
Zoom, the hybrid, that's easier, but
It's different
part of
now.
the magic of talking and meeting is being in person and having these dialogues, and that needs to be accessible to people in all parts of the state.
I always advocated at Vermont Farm to Plate from the very first meeting that was down here in the River Garden to have sub-regional farm to plate networks. And they abandoned that right away. They said it was too complicated to do. But in many ways, that's, I think, it's a role that a coordinator could play, is actually to support a network in this area that's talking to farmers, that's talking to the hunger side as well, and just thinking food system.
And the food sovereignty working group came up during the pandemic because the Hunger Council was so overwhelmed with immediate hunger needs that was obviously not the space to be having these longer term conversations. But we still wanted to have this conversation, so we created that other space. So it is exciting to hear that the Hunger Council is thinking of maybe doing more of that itself.
Yes, I don't know.
It's all part of also Hunger Free Vermont and what they want the Hunger Councils to do.
Right, and what the Hunger Council members here want to do. And, I left that meeting thinking, great, this is a good idea, who's gonna do it?
Yeah.
Which is I'm worried about leaving this meeting with the
Yeah.
same, with the same question.
Exactly.
I think, going back to, yes, Food Connects used to be involved in doing more of this stuff. I think this is an opportunity for us to think about what role we can play again. Not promising that we're gonna write a community food project, but just thinking about, maybe we are at a place where we can be more engaged. And participating in the Hunger Council again. I don't know.
Sounds like you're tentatively volunteering Food Connects to help. Yes.
I'm volunteering for another conversation.
Yes.
Yes, I can do that.
You just reminded me of another angle when we think about going back in time. So did you do, I missed the beginning of your presentation, but has anybody been looking at in our region how we are growing, encouraging the next generation of eaters and producers? Because our career center closed its agriculture, horticulture program. Bennington, the Southwest Vermont Career Center, closed its ag component. They kept the culinary arts, but they dropped the farm component. And so, like in Burlington, there's the Intervale. People can go there and start building their businesses. It is something we don't have anywhere around here that I can think of as a place where we can incubate new farms intentionally and new farmers.
Steve, is that your thoughts?
Right, and I think Strolling of the Heifers was aiming to be that space with Wyndham Grows. They were really trying to do that before they had to fold during the pandemic. We still have, though not in Vermont, in Keene, the Hannah Grimes Center for Entrepreneurship has some specific tracks and specific supports for farm and agriculture and value-added food product business development. So I point people there. I point people to BDCC, although they really don't differentiate between small businesses at that level. They just hand you a model to make a business plan, and maybe they know somebody with real estate. Cross your fingers, But Hannah Grimes is still very active, and they have great pro bono consultations with people just to give them access to some of the resources that are out there. And also based in Keene is the National Center for Appropriate Technologies. It's needing to be, it's a USDA Farm Bill funded program that works directly with farms to try and implement new technologies and innovations and try and develop a new workforce. So we don't look across the river as much, and I do think that if we were to
It's part of the
dig
regional
in,
aspect to this, is thinking how can we connect to southern New Hampshire and western Mass as resource sharing.
Yeah. Franklin and Cheshire County and us, if we shared a food system coordinator, then we'd be really off and running. Because that's a geographic basis, and that's the way the market works.
Yes, but that's all, I know this is about policy, but I'm talking about actual pragmatics. A place where there are tools, there are experienced people, and there's access to land that people aren't scrabbling for would be really neat.
Yeah. Agreed.
I think that was part of the retreat farm vision at one point.
Yeah, well, I was their first farm manager.
Which would be, that's a great, they've got infrastructure and they've got land there.
Yes.
So it's definitely real. We need that. We don't have that.
I wonder, that might be a place to revisit with them.
Yeah.
There's a lot on here that could be revisited with the retreat farm, I think.
Yeah, and I think they're in more detail with their recommendations, and we ran everything by all the people that are mentioned in here, and Yeah, there's some interesting thinking happening over there in terms of business incubation on the value added side. I don't know totally what's happening with their land as much, but I know that they're trying to make more space for value added people to grow. So I mean, that's producers. It's slightly different than farming, but it's on the similar side.
I've got one historical tidbit that I have to share on this point, which is that today I learned that the first community building built in Brattleboro was a grist mill, but there was no miller. It was a collectively owned and used grist mill. So we're back to the roots in terms of talking about shared in infrastructure and commercial space for processing all the farms in the surrounding area. I want to find out where that grist mill is.
Let's go turn it into something.
Yeah, like some bread or something. I don't know.
Yeah.
They did that with milk early on. I mean, like Bellows Falls had farmers brought all their milk to one place. It wasn't some big corporation, and
Yeah.
that was the model that things started from around here.
Co-ops.
Yep.
Yeah, cooperatives, yeah.
A lot of milk is still in cooperatives
A lot of milk is still in cooperatives, yeah.
at a larger scale.
On a larger scale, yeah. Any more questions or thoughts before we wrap up? Awesome.
Thank
That
you.
was so great. Thank you guys so much
Yes.
for coming.
Thank you, and Carissa.
And look out for the published version, and it will be out imminently, very soon. Thank you. Thank you, everybody.